Good morning, everyone. I think we're live. Sorry, I was just waiting for a cue. I'm hoping we are and that everybody can hear me. So thank you very much for joining the first session in our Tech Fest for Social Good. My name's Karen Lewis. I'm a director at the Wales Cooperative Centre and I'm also chair of Digital Leaders in Wales. We're absolutely delighted at the Wales Co-op Centre to be bringing this Tech Fest to you this week as part of Digital Leaders Week. We've been involved over the last 14 or so years at the Wales Co-op Centre delivering Welsh Government's digital inclusion programmes. And during that time, we've become more and more interested in the wider work within the tech for good sector. So we thought this would be a great opportunity to bring forward speakers from across that sector to share what they're doing and to give everyone the opportunity to find out a bit more, to look at the good practice that's out there and basically to make some new connections. So this morning is the first of 6 sessions. We're running throughout the week. Please visit the Digital Leaders website, and if you look under the Tech Fest tab, you'll find all our events over the next 5 days. So this morning, this is just to sort of kick us off and to start the conversation. Just wanted to say, first of all, this session is being recorded, so anyone who has logged in or registered for this session will get a copy of the recording after Digital Leaders Week. We'll be hearing from our 4 panelists, first of all, just 5 minutes each. And then after that, we'll be opening up for questions across, opening up the floor for questions. So please post any questions, comments that you have. You should be able to see that in your Zoom channel. There's a chat function. If you post your question there, my colleague Mike, who I think we can't see, but we'll hear in a minute, Mike Erskine, he'll be moderating and looking at those questions and feeding them in. So there'll be a chance for a wider discussion. So I think now you can probably see all our panelists. Really delighted to have 4 experts in their field, all with something exciting and challenging to contribute this morning, I hope. And so I'm going to start by introducing our first speaker, Dan Such. Well, I have to say we're all very envious of Dan's setting there. First of all, I thought perhaps it was just one of these funky little backdrops, but that is actually your shed, and I basically want it. I want it. It should go on George Clark's Amazing Spaces. It's fab. So thank you for joining us, Dan. So Dan is the director of CAST, the Centre for Accelerated Social Technology, whose purpose, I think, Dan, is to help create a more responsive, resilient and digitally enabled social sector. That's kind of your mission statement, I think. Dan is also co-founder of We the Catalysts, which is a coalition that describes itself on its website, and I love this, and I'm going to quote it, a call to arms for all of us who want to see social purpose at the heart of the digital revolution. So really raising a challenge there. Dan is also a member of the Charity Commission's Digital Advisory Group and board member of O2's UK stakeholder panel, providing oversight and advice on their social and sustainability work. So absolutely delighted to have you here, Dan. I'm going to hand over to you now to kick us off. You have 5 minutes. I'll be handing over to the next panelist then. We'll have all panelists speaking for 5 minutes and then we'll open it to the floor at the end. So over to you, Dan. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Karen. Thank you so much. Genuinely really excited to be here. It sounds from that intro as though I should be really, really busy. But so I do run CAST, but I am definitely here today to talk about this network called Catalyst and the work that's going on. The reason for that is Catalyst was set up to support all those organisations and individuals who are trying to understand how best to use digital within their work to respond to how people they're trying to support use digital. And now is the time where there's been such an incredible response from the charity sector over the last 6 months in how they use digital tools to support their communities, particularly when social isolation means we can't meet them face to face. And so actually the starting point for today is to recognise that incredible kind of shift in the sector, that incredible response to COVID, and to say thank you to everyone who's on this call. All the charities I've engaged with over the last 6 months are just doing heroic work, so thank you. We've also seen when working with funders just how big that shift has been. There's been a shift in applications to funders where about 70% of applications right now are for charities trying to do something to do with digital. And that responds to about under 10% set of applications kind of pre-COVID. So there's just been this huge shift over the last few months, as we all know, as charities try to understand how best to use digital to ensure they can continue with their businesses, to continue to kind of deliver the value they can to their communities. I'd like to just kind of bring up 3 things really quickly that we have seen over the last 6 months that have just kind of cemented our understanding about how this works really well. And the first, and Mike's going to post some links as I go through these. The first is the thing that helps charities the most develop their digital capability capacity is the role of the digital lead within their organisation. And when I say that, I don't mean the person who really gets digital or the person who has an incredibly long background in digital data or design. It's the person who's been given either the responsibility to lead this work, or it's the person who's taking on themselves to figure out how digital best works within their charity. What we've realised and kind of understood from so much research over the past few months, some that Mike will point to now, another report that will be published later on today, is that it's that individual who is the catalyst within the organisation to change the way in which we use digital data and design to create better support for our communities. If you are that person, then we would love to find ways to support you. We have all sorts of kind of tools across the Catalyst network, such as Digital Candle, which is just free advice from experts who are just happy to have a 5-minute to an hour conversation with you. Coffee connections, where people come together just to have that informal kind of peer connection over a virtual cup of coffee to see how else we can kind of improve our own practice. But just say, if you are the digital lead, the person who's taken on that responsibility or who is determined to figure out how digital best works within your charity, then you are the most important person, and we would love to support you, whether that's influencing your board and your team, kind of helping you put plans in place, or helping you kind of connect to others who are doing this. But it's really clear that over the last 6 months and well beyond, it's the starting of that individual digital lead who wants to make the difference with digital that has the greatest effect on their charity and then on their community overall. The second thing I'd love to kind of pause on for a moment is perhaps a slight change for some charities, which is one of the most important parts of developing digital within your work, is this period that we would call discovery, which is taking the time at the beginning of any kind of use of digital to understand what problems you're trying to address from the perspective of the community that you're working with. Now, very often, the way in which we write applications, we think about projects, is we dream them up in advance. Very often we then ask for some funding from a funder, and we receive that funding to then deliver the thing we've asked about. But in really good digital projects, taking the time to work with our community to understand their needs, their behaviours, their expectations, and then to figure out how digital can best be used to support them is a critical part. Using user research and kind of community-based research and co-design, it's where with digital projects that don't include really good discovery, they almost always don't work, because they almost always miss the real problem that's held at the heart of the community. We run an accelerator program called Fuse, and about 100% of the problems that were brought to us were wrong. Certainly 100% of the solutions that were brought to us at the start of the projects were wrong, but most of the problems too. And that's because this phase of kind of user research, of working with your community to understand what their behaviours are around digital, how they're using digital tools, how they see the problems they want to overcome. Those are kind of the gold nuggets we need to understand before we think about how an organisation can use digital to support them. So the second thing I'd say is really do take time to do the discovery as you try to understand how best to use digital by framing it around the needs, behaviours and expectations of those you're trying to support. And hopefully another link that Mike will share is something called Design Hops, which is a free workshop to help you do that, all online. We're currently supporting 103 charities with 11 different digital partners, all going through this process. It's a critical part for any charity as you begin to think about how you best use digital to support your community. And the last thing I'd say is, over the last few months, it's been really clear there's such a massive increase in demand for the work from our sector, such an incredible demand on charities at the time at which income has dropped dramatically. It's not going to be able a chance to go back to where we were pre-COVID. We're going to have to think about how else we can intentionally design our sector and the way in which our organisations work. So what I'd really urge everyone here, and I'd love to be part of this, is to think, how do we intentionally design now how we want our sector to best work, using the best of digital data and design to ensure we're supporting our communities, that we're creating our organisations and our connections and our collaborations in the best way possible to bring about the greatest effect. It feels to me that, having looked at the best examples of the use of digital over the past few months, the ones where there are new collaborations, where people are thinking about best ways of using resources and best ways of designing around the use of digital, those are the ones that make the biggest effect. There's a really great set of examples of collective approaches called service recipes on the Catalyst website. Check them out to see how we can learn from others. But it feels like now is the time in this session across this week to reflect what are the characteristics we want to kind of take forward from this COVID period, what are the things we want to bring back from pre-COVID, and how can we together intentionally design the way in which our sector can be most effective through the use of digital data and design. I'm pretty sure my time is up, but I'm over the moon to be here today. I'm really looking forward to the conversations, and again, thank you all for all the incredible work that everyone here has been doing over the last few months. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. That was great, and lots of food for thought there, which I'm sure we'll pick up later on in our conversation. So thank you for that, and for sticking very closely to your time. That's excellent. Thank you. So I'd like to introduce now our next panelist, Dr. Sangeet Bhullar. Sangeet is the founder and the executive director of Wise Kids, which is a non-profit organisation providing consultancy in internet and mobile technologies, and also in internet literacy and safety. Sangeet is also chair of the Wales Internet Safety Partnership, and she's spoken at many international conferences and provided and continues to provide consultancy across Britain, Singapore and Malaysia. So very pleased to have you here, Sangeet. Thank you again for giving your time today. And now I'll hand over to you to have some of your thoughts and reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm not still the chair of the Wales Internet Safety Partnership, but apart from that, hopefully that's right. So I wanted to take the opportunity to share some thoughts really about the impact of COVID and lockdown on everyday communities, and look at how we address barriers to digital education and engagement, and ensure that everybody gets the most from digital. But what COVID and lockdown have really shown is the importance of internet access. And this is particularly true when we think about young people in education. So I wanted to give you one example, a sort of little story to highlight the points here. So let's consider Mia, who might be 12 years old, who comes from a single parent family. Mum cannot afford the internet, but she was doing well in school because after school club ensured that she could have homework and she could complete her tasks. But when lockdown happened, Mia suddenly found herself unable to access school's online provision. School contacts Mum and says, can Mia pop in to pick up paper-based lessons? Mum is way too afraid to have Mia go into school, so she says no, basically. So we have situations like Mia's situations where you can see inequality being exacerbated by a lack of digital access. We know Newport City Council, Newport is my local authority, recently published an article saying just at the time of lockdown, there were more than 2,500 young people who didn't have adequate technology for education at home. Now, this is being addressed through the Welsh Government support programme, and so they've provided devices and Wi-Fi connectivity. Similarly, Gwynedd Council just announced that they're going to provide year 10s and 11s with laptops because they've suddenly, I don't know if it's suddenly, but they've recognized that without adequate technology, you just don't have a level playing field. And so it's really important to see these developments. But we know that online access is not just about education. For all of us who've been stuck at home or stuck working from home or in so many service sectors, you've just not been able to see your family. So lockdown has highlighted the importance of things like connecting to family, the importance of everyday business, access to finances, access to be able to shop online. And, certainly from my perspective as a business, we have adapted and changed service provision to make sure that we're now offering programs that are blended or totally online. This is something we've been wanting to do for a long time, but COVID has sort of forced our hand. So it's really important to consider all the facets that digital access actually affects. I also want to talk about other barriers that may not be so visible. So again, I want to illustrate this point with a little example, a scenario. Consider Ashley, who's 19, who's been in the care system, but she's now out of the care system, living on her own, suffers with a lot of anxiety and worry, but all her access to her support networks has been removed because she's not able to meet her social worker face to face. And this is a real challenge because she feels very isolated. And so we can see here that if you don't have adequate provision and you're a service provider, in this case, if you're a social worker working within the local authority and having to provide services, that gets disrupted and there are other consequences. So people who receive services, people who are more vulnerable, are more affected by this digital exclusion. So these are some of the things we need to consider. I know that, in my work, I've been fortunate to work with children's charities and particularly looking at child protection issues during lockdown. And I know that innovation is happening. I know that they are adapting to provide these services. But I think, everybody's on that learning journey. But these are issues we need to be aware of, the different vulnerabilities that, that can get exacerbated. So this brings me to my second and final point, really, which is the need for digital skills and literacy. And, for services to adapt, to be able to provide, provision online, they need staff who are skilled. So today, if we are to truly bridge this digital divide gap, we don't just need access, we also need the skills and literacies to be able to participate fully. And by that, I don't mean, for example, just the basic and functional skills, but fully understanding what it means to be a digital citizen today, able to participate as needed. In an age where there's so much of misinformation, we're talking about the literacies to make sense of content, to connect with friends and family, to develop your business, to know the best sites to show your children for homework if you're a parent. So all these things together are all about really how we can provide equity in society. The two key things are access and that digital literacy. And if we are also to achieve this equity, I think there are other barriers we need to be aware of. Things like poverty, things like access to education, things like our mental health and well-being. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sangeet. Again, plenty of food for thought there, and some real insight, I think, into some of the individual cases that you were highlighting there, which kind of bring it home and make it real. Our next panelist, Ashley Bale, is the Digital Inclusion and Innovations Manager at Innovate Trust, where he focuses on promoting digital inclusion, encouraging digital innovation, and delivering projects to help achieve this, particularly across health, social care, and other public sector projects. Innovate Trust was the winner of the Digital Inclusion Award at the Wales Third Sector Awards in 2017, and a finalist in last year's UK Social Enterprise Awards in the Tech for Good category. So again, delighted to have you here today with us, Ashley, and many thanks for giving up your time to join us. So I'll now hand over to you for your 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for everyone who's joining us today. It's a pleasure to be part of Digital Leaders Week and the first Tech Fest in Wales. So basically, I work for Innovate Trust, and we're an organisation that provides support to adults with learning disabilities across South Wales. And during the pandemic, we've really seen a change in the way the digital innovation and digital inclusions had to take place. We were in the midst of developing a community-based app called Insight, which is now launched. We've managed to onboard all the people we support within Innovate Trust to use the app. And the app is providing around 50 live activities per week to support adults with learning disabilities. But what we did notice was that during the C-19 pandemic, that there's a lot of people who are isolated within the wider community, who potentially may not have support providers providing support. So we've reached out to people within the community, and we've offered access to the app. It's just a massive change across the sector. We've seen things like the first post on social media for some people we support. We've also seen things such as people posting their first ever selfie, which in 2020 is quite incredible to think that some people may never made a post on social media. So we're making this app accessible to everyone. Anyone can join. We're bringing on organisations and advocacy groups as well. So we're offering a wider plethora of activities to people throughout the community. So anyone can join that app. What I've also noticed as well is other organisations such as housing associations across Wales are developing their own digital inclusion strategies and bringing in new ways of working, particularly now during the pandemic. So I definitely say that there's a lot of good work going on. I've also like to say that Digital Communities Wales and intergenerational projects they're running, they're fantastic, and the access to technology is being provided. So like Sanjit just said, there's a lot of cases where people aren't able to access technology or internet connection, and devices now being gifted. What I'd like to also push on is the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act and the 7 Wellbeing Goals and the 5 Ways of Working and how they're taking an impact and influence across the digital sector. I'd just like to say that we need to be more bold, take risk and be more creative. And I think what we've seen now during the pandemic is a lot of change that may have taken a lot longer to take place. And I think leaders of today now are taking more risk, realizing that through digital innovation and digital inclusion, we can make a massive impact on people's lives. What I'd like to say is it's worth definitely joining the Hack for Social Good event on Friday at 10 a.m. So if you've got any ideas and you're thinking things that can make a difference across the sector or your workplace or organisation, I definitely suggest that you take part in the Hack for Social Good event. It's just massive things going on across the community, particularly with Insight and how it's uniting people in different communities and different backgrounds. There's just massive disparity there between people who haven't got access to technology, and we've gone out as an organisation, and people in the community who haven't got access to technology, we've gifted devices. What I'd like to push as well, that technology is just a tool. It shouldn't be used to replace things. So we can deliver positive social impact, and we can deliver that through the use of technology, but it's just being mindful that technology should just be a tool for change. I urge organisations, individuals attending to think how they can support change through integration, involvement and collaboration through Wales. And I definitely think that there's a lot more work that organisations could do by collaborating together, and that's how we can see real impact across Wales using digital inclusion innovations. And that's it really for me, and I look forward to seeing all the other speakers, and thank you for attending.
Thank you very much, Ashley, and really, really great to hear that work that's going on with adults with learning disabilities, and we might have some more conversation about that if people want to ask any more questions around that. So I'd now like to introduce our final panellist, Lee Waters, Deputy Minister for Economy and Transport here in Wales. Lee is the Welsh Labour and Cooperative Member of the Senedd for the Llanelli constituency in Carmarthenshire. He has a particular interest in digital and was the lead author and the panel chair for a report published 2 years ago called System Reboot, Transforming Public Services Through Better Use of Digital. This was an expert panel report for the Welsh Government, and I know that Lee has been continuing this work and is now convening another follow-on panel to try and build on the recommendations and the findings of that report. So I'm hoping, Deputy Minister, that you could perhaps reflect on some of the things that you've heard this morning and maybe give us some of your insight into this big area of tech for social good.
Well, thanks, Karen. And I'd just like to just continue the conversation that's been started this morning, really. I mean, it just highlights that this is an ecosystem. This is not just something government has to deliver. All the panelists have very well underlined the role that the third sector has in this area, as well as the other actors. So I just briefly reflect really on my thoughts on the role government has here, and then we can continue the conversation in the next phase. So I suppose the first thing I'd say is, we talk about tech for social good. It's an obvious point, but tech is agnostic. It might be a force for social good, it might not be a force for social good. That's up to us. It certainly has a disruptive influence, and left unchecked, the disruptive influence can be harmful. Reflecting back through the development of technology over the last couple of 100 years. We wouldn't go back now and say that the knocker-upper who was replaced by the alarm clock who'd come round in the morning and rattle your window to make you up on time for a small fee is a lamented role in society. But for the people who were doing that job, they lost their livelihood. And we can be, I think, a little too flippant about the progress technology offers, and it undoubtedly does, but there are winners and losers to that progress. And government has a proper role to make sure that the winners share the proceeds of their advances, and the losers are helped to reskill and to adjust to the new landscape. So I think there's a very clear role for government to create a narrative, to stop people being scared by this, to show that this can be properly harnessed, a force for good, and to play its role to trying to smooth the edges of that change. I think that's a really important role government has, and that's why I'm really keen through the work that you mentioned, Karen, about understanding the role that tech and digital has in public services. So I'm not interested in tech, I'm interested in digital, because digital is about an approach, it's about culture. Tech is just a means to get there. And digital requires a user-focused approach. And I think that is critical for me. And the thing I find exciting about digital is that it allows us to come at old problems in a new way. And there are all the barriers that have been built up to doing things differently can be sort of sidestepped by putting a digital skin around it. So, for example, in the way public services work, so we've created a Centre for Digital Public Services based in Ebbw Vale, working virtually and digitally as you'd expect, that is creating digital transformation squads to create those skill set and the need for skills, which is a critical point, was mentioned earlier. So creating squads of multidisciplinary professionals who can tackle a problem afresh, starting from the needs of the user. And the first project that they're doing is with Torfaen, Blaenau Gwent and Neath councils, looking at adult social care. So using the discovery process, speaking to users and the professionals within the system to see how can we re-engineer just old-fashioned service design. There's nothing whiz-bang about this, but digital allows us to approach service design from a slightly different perspective. And that I think has got great power to unlock and change public services so they work better for the people they're designed to work for. But also it unleashes then a different dynamic of change and innovation that we need to get on top of. So when we are developing these new skills, how can we make sure that apprenticeships and local people are reskilled to do these jobs? UX professionals aren't really a job that exists. Well, we need that job, and we need those people to do it. So this is a chance to skill new people with the key roles we're going to need to make this digital transformation agenda come alive. And of course, I guess the final role for government in all of this is infrastructure. So that's part of my portfolio too. I personally think we've got hung up on infrastructure a bit too much. It's essential, and COVID has shown us the impact the black spots have on people without infrastructure. But infrastructure needs to be designed alongside the purpose of digital, and that's about change to make people's lives better. It's not an end in itself. We can get a bit too hung up on the latest wires and what they do. So I want us to take a sort of a whole system approach here. We're about to publish a new digital strategy from the Welsh Government, which I hope is going to put infrastructure, user need, and skill all together in an ecosystem to show that this is an agenda for social good. But if we get it wrong, then there's no guarantee that will happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Lee. And I'd just like to pick up on a couple of things there before we open up for wider questions. First of all, just a question back to you, Lee, on that one. The digital strategy for Wales, do we have a date for when that's going to be public?
Good God, no. It'll be this year. I'm sure there is a date, I just can't remember it. But I think we're looking for early December, from memory.
That's great. So keep an eye out for that. And just really taken by the comments there from Lee around people, and I think that's come through with all our four speakers. tech, even digital, if at the end of this, at the end of the transformation, the work that we're doing in this field, if people's lives aren't improved, then what's the purpose? And I guess that's what we're trying to unlock during our week-long set of events this week. So I'll leave that there for now. And I think, Mike, we've got some questions. I can't see them actually on my screen, so I'll rely on my colleague Mike to feed some questions into us. Mike.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Borodar. Yes, we've got a first question I've got here is from Bev Woods. So thanks for submitting your question, Bev. She's asked, what do the panel believe are the interface barriers to access technology? There's been a lot of talk about young people and access to technology. However, the older generation are being left behind. So Karen, I don't know who wants to ask her that question.
First line there, Mike, please.
So yeah, what do the panel believe are the interface barriers to access technology?
Anybody want to pick that up? You've all kind of touched on it. If not, I'm going to go over to the Deputy Minister.
I'm happy to pick that one up.
Well, then
Yeah, so I think you're right. There is a big barrier to access to technology, and I think a lot of it's down to the digital divide. But I think a lot of the intergenerational work, such as the things that Digital Community Wales is kind of bridging that gap, because you're using students within schools pre-COVID going into work with older people to use technology, and I think there's a lot of skills can be shared amongst that. So the younger students may be teaching people to use technology, whilst the older people are also sharing their skills and their values and teaching things that way. And I think I just think it's the technology is accessible to people. I think that a lot of the mainstream technology is now becoming more affordable, but I don't think there's much awareness out there. So I think we just need to push more awareness around technology and what is available. A lot of the smart speaker technology is now much more accessible, and I think that's more affordable to people as well. And that doesn't matter what age you are. I think as long as you've got a voice, you can use that technology. So I think it's just sharing awareness. And
lovely, thank you, Ashley. Does anybody, Dan, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I would build by saying, by starting with the motivations for using technology. So to twist that question slightly, it's like, what's the motivations that people want to kind of or the problems that people want to solve, and then how can we support them through good design and good technology to do that? Because very often technology can be accessed. It can be accessed by proxy users. That might be family members or neighbours or community members. But what we really need to understand, and this is why discovery is so important, is understanding what the problems are that people want to overcome, even if it's as simple as just wanting to access a crossword online or accessing something vital like a public service. We can understand what the problems are or the ways in which they want to improve their lives, and then we can find the technology to support them, whether that's them accessing the technology themselves or whether that's through proxy users such as neighbours, family or community members.
Lovely, thank you, Dan. Lee.
Yeah, just to add to that, really, I think Dan made a critical point there. I think, first of all, calling them interface barriers is probably one of the problems. What the hell does that mean? I think poverty is a massive barrier, and we can dress it up in other things, but actually, it's poverty, and that's that is a barrier to just being able to afford a broadband connection, afford a piece of kit. I don't think it's as simple as generational, because we all know. It's more complex than that. There are lots of examples of natural intergenerational working, and older people who are very comfortable with tech, and younger people who are not comfortable with tech or don't have access to it. So I think it's more complex than this question suggests. Just to develop the point a little bit, I'm just reflecting on my experience as a chair of governors 15 years ago, so long before I came into politics. I was the chair of governors of Barry Island Primary School, which became a bit of a celebrated example of a school that used tech and digital well. And that was about it seeing itself as a community, really, within the school, and everybody helping each other. It's about confidence. And I think confidence is a huge issue, and it's particularly an issue in schools. I always find the most depressing element of the Estyn annual report is the section on digital. We've had some feedback recently from Careers Wales that one of the things they're struggling with in getting young people to access careers options, there's a lack of a digital culture in schools, was the phrase they used. And I think this is a huge issue. So that's not about access to kit on the whole, because schools have got access to good enough kit. It's about you having teachers and teaching assistants, the whole community in the school, who use that kit in a way to bring learning alive. And a lot of that is about, say, based on my experience, it's a little bit dated now, but the experience I have going around schools in my job reinforces it. We need to help people to know how to use this in a way that is meaningful, and stop talking about it as tech or interface, because these sort of things put people off. This is, as I mentioned earlier, this is a tool to help you do your job better or to make your life better. Let's figure out between us how we can get the most out of that. And that involves, drawing on the intergenerational model. It involves other people cooperating and helping each other. And I think that's one of the things we need to unlock, is that power of community to help people to capture its full potential.
Thank you very much, Lee. Okay, just because I would like to, I've got a burning point of time.
Just a very quick point. I totally agree with what Lee has just said there. I think, we are very fortunate in the new curriculum. Digital competence is a key strand, and that is about having the literacy and understanding of what it means and what digital can bring, because it's never about the tech, it's about why we use it. And I think the one point I wanted to highlight with the question from the audience is fear. I meet a lot of people who say, I'm not going to bank online because I don't feel it's safe. So there is something about the unmet or understanding the barriers. And I think, Dan talks about that discovery. And I think that's really key. And I think we can't underestimate that for some people, fear and lack of confidence with digital is the barrier to engaging. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have we got another question, Mike? Can we move on to another question if we've got one there?
Yeah, I've got one which is it's for looking at the kind of third sector here. It's from Nathan Williams. He says, the majority of charities and the third sector deliver services. Is a focus on tech for good too narrow a focus? How do we frame digital in a way third sector organizations understand?
That's actually a really important question. And I think later in the week, as part of our TechFest, we have a session, I think it's Thursday night, looking at the importance of digital leadership in the third sector in Wales, because I think we're all recognising there are some issues there. So a really good question. Again, I think it's relevant to anyone. So does anybody want to pick that up? Dan, okay.
I think it's such a critical question. Thank you for that one, Mike. So I think the starting point is, you're right, very often when charities engage with digital, it starts off by thinking about how we can use digital for comms and social media, and then and then digital for fundraising. More mature organisations definitely focus then on what's the role of digital in service delivery, and whether that's advice and information online or whether it's kind of direct services. The reason that's so critical is because there's been a real shift in how people are looking for support. That there are so many kind of examples now of where we look for support, information, and resources which starts with a blank Google search rather than knowledge of the local kind of charitable ecosystem. So we have to think about our new role within how people are looking for support and information, how we can provide those services to them. The sorts of kind of links that I shared earlier on around kind of discovery and service design processes are at the heart of that. But there's one other really critical role that charities play that I think kind of reflects some of the conversations we've had, which is charities have traditionally championed those who are furthest from power. And at the moment, the way in which the organisations that kind of really have an influence over people's kind of lives include those big tech companies, include those who create the tech infrastructure that we use for civic spaces and shared spaces. We need charities to understand how they can develop their own services, how we can develop it with others who are also providing services to our communities. But we also need to have a deep enough kind of digital literacy ourselves so that we can champion the needs of those who are creating really significant and influential technologies. So how can we talk to big tech companies? How can we ensure the charity's voice is at the heart of how those technologies are designed? So I think there are two parts. One, we need to understand how we can create services directly. And I think there are lots of great examples of that. The second, we need to develop our understanding and our voice, to ensure that as technology has a great influence over other people's lives and our lives, the charity voice is at the heart of those design decisions.
Thank you, Dan. Lee?
Yeah, can I just put a bit of challenge to Dan there? I agree. I agree with his point, but I've worked in the charitable sector of a couple of charities, and I think there is there's a danger we just assume that because charities are closer to the ground, they therefore have greater insight into user need, and that ain't necessarily so. And I think it's really important that the digital centre works with the third sector to make sure those skills that we're developing for use in the public sector, those 8 multidisciplinary skill sets I mentioned as part of the squads, are also able to be accessed and developed within the voluntary sector. And I had a conversation with Derek Walker about this on Friday and put him in touch with Sally Meacham, who's the chair of the Digital Centre, to continue this conversation, because I think it's important, because there's a danger, some third sector bodies are in effect producer interests. Don't think of themselves like that, would resent being called that, but that's what they are. And they don't instinctively will understand user need. User need is done through a discovery process, is done through a service design process, and that they will get as many insights from doing that as they do through their normal work. I can remember when I was running the Institute for Welsh Affairs, we did a crowd sourced project on cancer services, and it's called Let's Talk Cancer. Really good piece of work. It's still there on the information superhighway if you are interested in it. And what I found interesting from that is I started off that process assuming it would come up with third sector, no close to the ground, assuming it would come up with a set of conclusions. And actually, through speaking to people, came up with a completely different set of conclusions, which none of us had anticipated. And that's through listening to the user, not assuming you think you know what the user wants. And that's, that is a failing and a barrier that's applicable to every sector, not just the public sector. So I don't think that the voluntary sector, third sector, is intrinsically any better place than anybody else, which is why these new skills we're developing are just as relevant.
Dan, you want to come back in on that?
I would love to. Actually, I think I almost wholly agree. And I think one of the main differences is recognizing the separation between user need and user behaviors and social need and social behaviors, because they very often aren't that aligned. So I desperately want to save for my future, but I'm not going to. I'm going to spend it this week. Or I desperately want to kind of drink less, but I'm not going to because it's Friday night. And those tensions between the social need of better savings, kind of better relationship with alcohol, aren't the same as kind of user need behavior. So you're right, discovery is critical. There is one thing that I think I probably would disagree with, which is I think the charity sector has a unique starting point, which is the benefit to individuals and communities more than any other kind of motivation, more than a profit motivation, more than kind of a scale and growth. And that means we start off thinking about how to design better services from that perspective. It means we get into all sorts of challenges around business models and sustainability that doesn't rely on donations. But what it means is we will always fix firmly on those who are in kind of the worst situations. And very often when we see tech companies doing great work around digital for social good, they often focus more on the worried well, who can kind of help kind of balance the business model with the social impact. So I think there's something about how we can support charities to develop their skills to work really well with tech companies, as we're trying to do with Catalyst. But I do think there's a particular voice from the charity sector, which is always starting from how do we champion the needs of those furthest from power, that we need to bake into how technologies are developed.
Thank you, Dan. I'd just like to add just something from my point of view to that, which is, I think the whole issue of discovery is an interesting one, and I kind of agree with you. I think we talk about the third sector, the charity sector. It's huge. We're talking about ranging from an organisation that could have 1 person and 3 volunteers to organisations with 100 plus staff that are delivering big contracts. It's a very diverse sector. But I also would just like to put a plea. When we talk about the charity sector, and I know, Dan, you and I have had this conversation in the past, and I know that at Catalyst you work with organisations that are not necessarily a registered charity, but when we're talking about that, and I'd like to embrace the whole not-for-profit, in the sense that we're also talking about social businesses, we're talking about cooperatives and mutuals and other not-for-profit organisations that are not necessarily registered charities. So just wanted to throw that out there, because I think some of the audience may not recognise the term charity actually applies to them, but we're talking about the wider sector. Yeah? Okay, thank you very much. Mike.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of very specific questions here, which probably is going to be a little bit difficult to address. So I don't know, Karen, if you have anything else you want to specifically ask the panel, because I think all of these ones are very specific either to how we help it include it in the curriculum. And we've got ones here about how we support older people and the vulnerable. So yeah, there's lots of specific questions here. So I'm happy to put it back to you, Karen, see if you've got a question that can.
Let's throw out the one that you've got there about older people, because we've touched on that already, and then let's see where we go from there.
Okay, great. Sorry, just getting it up now, Karen, 1 sec. Yeah, do the panel think that there should be a greater focus on and investment in digital, specifically targeting long-term illness in the older generation? If not, do we run the risk of leaving people behind that could massively benefit lives? And that's from Brian Watson. So do we think there should be a greater focus on and investment in digital, specifically targeting long-term illness and the older generation?
Okay, that is quite specific. Very timely as well, because of some of the conversations that have been happening. Lee, did you have your hand up there?
Yeah. Just a quick response to it, really. As I said, the first discovery project we're doing is around adult social care. So we need to systematically go to redesign public services, and we're starting with this one because it's been identified as a need, and you were kind of part of a panel we pulled together to sort of try and sort of shortlist where we thought would be good candidates to start this process, and that was one that came through it. But I would just say, just in terms of this user need point, and this goes to the digital inclusion exclusion point and older people point. If you are designing services based on the needs of the user, they need to take into account the needs of all the users. So they need to take into account the people who are digitally excluded just as much as they need to take into account of those who are digitally able. So using this process properly, you're not going to come up with a website support as a solution. You're going to have to come up with something that deals with the whole spectrum of people's needs. And that's what I think is so exciting about the user needs lens. They may not necessarily come up with a digital solution. So I don't think we should automatically assume that the digital approach will bring a digital solution. It should be much more nuanced than that.
Can I just pick up on that? And I don't know maybe whether Dan or anyone, but particularly Dan, might have something to add, because I think this is actually critical, and we are thankfully beginning to do more and more talk about the importance of discovery and user experience. Dan, I know this has been in your DNA forever, but some people are still playing catch up on this. So I guess what can we do to help organisations, particularly, in the not-for-profit, the third sector, where perhaps traditionally this isn't a way that people have worked around discovery? They're hand to mouth, they've got a project, they deliver it, it's task and finish, they move on, they've got their KPIs, that's the way organisations work. They're not necessarily looking at it from, I hate the word user, from a person perspective, the people, the stakeholder perspective. Based on your experience, do you have any sort of thoughts about how we can flip that, the sort of culture change? What do we need to be doing to get organisations changing the way that they look? And I guess you're going to say it's something around leadership, but I'd just like to hear a bit of your thinking on that.
Yeah, thank you. That's such a great question. I think there are a few things internally, and quite a lot of them are external. The first is being able to invest the time to actually go out to your community and kind of research and develop with them as part of a shared kind of innovation team. That takes resource and time, and that we know from all tech innovation, that's the way in which you do it. You invest in a team to go through this process of discovery, and we know that's critical. That doesn't fit really well with funding practices, where very often you're pitching a solution, you're pitching that you're the only one who can deliver that solution, and that's the way in which you attract the resources to then go and kind of deliver your project. So the first is that relationship. We need more funders to understand that if you're going to fund anything around digital, you must fund good discovery. And what that means is to think that kind of the solution you're being told might be made might not be the things made. Instead, you're funding the right team to use the right process to solve the right problem, and the solution will come from the process. So that's partly kind of funder behaviour. I think that the second is leadership. It's allowing those who are closest to the data to make decisions, not just kind of the highest paid person in the organisation. And that's really tough because it means you're looking for new data to inform decisions about how the team will work and how products will be made. And that requires a different sort of leadership that not only will hold the space for others, but it also support those to gather new evidence to make decisions. And the third is practice. So I mentioned earlier something called Design Hubs, which is it's a free resource that are delivered by the Catalyst Network to support people to go through this discovery process. It's when you think about a very big project, it feels like it's quite a big thing to do. So just find something really small. It might be an internal problem. It might be something just for a small number of your community. But just try a discovery process. Use the free resources that are available just to get into the habit, and we can slowly start kind of building that into the bids we put to funders. We'll work really hard with the funders that we work with to help them ensure they're funding in the right way. But just practice it is the kind of the starting point in the smallest way you can.
Thank you, Dan. And I would urge anyone, I can see that we've got your Twitter handle underneath, so people can contact you via Twitter. Mike, have we posted in the Zoom chat links to Dan's organisations?
Yes, we have. Yeah, we've and I'll do that for all the speakers at the end. So, like I said, their Twitter handles is there on the page as well, but I'll post all the direct links. But yeah, Dan's are up there.
That's great. Because I think, having worked with you before, Dan, and worked with you through CAST and the Catalyst, the resource and the expertise that you and your team have are phenomenal and they're free, people can access that. So I would urge any audience members who are interested in pursuing this to please get in touch with Dan. Thank you for that, Dan. I just wanted to pick up on another point that both Lee and Sangeeta touched on, really, and to sort of throw this back out again, which I think has become a particular issue with the pandemic. And this is the issue around sort of schools and skills. And I was struck by what you'd said, Lee, about the lack of a digital culture in schools. And that really makes my heart sink, if that's where we're at with the younger generation, because for me, that touches on equity as well. Some kids will be absolutely fine because they've got that support at home, and they'll carry on being digitally savvy and work their way up the digital ladder. But that isn't the case for everyone. So I made a note to myself of sort of 3 areas here around schools. So skills, culture, and the issue of equity. And as we are now facing a situation where so many young people are having to access not just education, but, as you mentioned earlier, Sangeet, support through whether it's social services or health support, pretty much everything online. What can we do, or what should we be doing to support schools? And it's not just schools. There's a big issue here around youth services. And again, we all know what's happened to the youth service sector. That's been decimated. But what do we need to do to make sure that we've got sort of equity for our children and young people around this going forward, so that we don't even create a bigger, and it's not just a digital divide, it's a social justice issue. It's an issue of equity for children and young people. So I'm looking particularly at Lee and Sangeet for any thoughts you have about what we should be trying to do. And I don't just mean government, I mean we as society to sort of help this maybe.
Well, I'll be very brief because I've talked too much, but I think the leadership and culture and skills you've mentioned are the key. The discovery work that was done, which led to the setting up of the Public Services Digital Centre, showed that we have an ignorant class of leadership, frankly. This isn't just a Welsh problem, but we looked in Wales, and certainly not just a public sector problem. But that generation who are in leadership positions, on the whole, and I shouldn't generalise, but let me, don't get it. And I think that's they fear it, they don't understand it, and they don't know where to start. And I think that's the problem. And then allowing them to accept this is a new culture, which is a threat to the way things have been done. It does require skills to be able to do it, and that does in many ways involve starting from scratch about what users want. That to me is at the heart of the problem, and hopefully the digital centre is going to begin to unravel that.
Yeah, I will echo, what Lise has said. I think there are a couple of points I want to raise in ensuring that we address vulnerability and the specific barriers that young people may have. It's also about personal intervention. In other words, you need the leadership and you need the direction and the vision to include. So the access and providing kit is just step one. Step two is then looking at what other barriers exist for that learning to happen. It could be single parents, poverty. It could be, perhaps a child is a carer for their parent at home. So we need to look at the personal and what support our most disadvantaged young people and communities need. So the whole thing about user-centered design, co-design of services and interventions is key, I think. And I think, there has to be the will, because this is not something we can afford to just look over, sort of pass by. I mean, I think if we don't address these inequalities, they're only going to get worse.
Thank you, Sangeet. Absolutely, yeah, it's a real challenge, and thank you both for your contributions there. I'm looking at the clock. We've got about 2 minutes left. I've just had one more question coming in. That's probably something that should have opened the conversation, because it could get us talking for another 2 hours. But it's a question that's coming from a member of the audience. I'll throw it out to anyone who wants to contribute. Is there a sufficient understanding of digital transformation? I think we're all just going, no. Do we even know what we mean by that term? Dan, go on.
I think so. I think what we know is that organisations that are more responsive to change are more resilient, and that's kind of the where we're trying to get to. So organisations can be more responsive to the needs of their communities. The way in which we can empower that is through digital data and design, and particularly kind of research into the third sector. There is tons of research now that shows the processes that charities go through, that individuals go through to become more responsive and resilient through digital. So I will put some links on Twitter after this to some really new research about journeys for individuals and charities to go on as they become more digitally mature, as they go through this digital transformation. I think if you think of it as because of maturity and kind of moving towards being more responsive and resilient, and everything else comes through, then there's loads of research. It's pretty clear now most of the kind of journeys that charities can go through, and there's lots of support out there right now. And the reason it's critical, just to kind of keep on focusing on that, is the Charity Digital Skills Report at the beginning of this year highlighted that those charities that were more digitally mature were more responsive to COVID and more able to respond to the needs of their community. So I think if we hold that as kind of what digital transformation is, it's being more resilient through being more responsive to the changing context in which we're operating, then I think we have a good understanding of how to get there.
Thank you, Dan. And just a little plug on the back of that. So the report that you referred to, the Charity Digital Skills Report, I know one of the people who's one of the movers in that is Zoe Amar, and Zoe is speaking at our session. I keep saying Thursday. I'm hoping Mike will jump in if I've got this wrong. So I haven't got the calendar in front of me, but our session looking at digital leadership in the third sector. So that's another session, hopefully, that people might be able to join. We are just about out of time, unless anybody else wants to jump on to what Dan just said there. Any more final comments? I'm aware that there's another session on our heels. Lee, are you just moving in your seat?
Well, I'm trying to stop myself from talking. I failed. I just echo Dan's point. It's transformation not for its own sake. This isn't just a digital thing. We're not doing it because we can do it. We need to be doing it because we ought to do it, because it'll make things better for the people we're trying to help, and that's the key thing. So if there's a leader out there who thinks, don't really know much about digital, feel I probably should know more, should be doing it, but don't know where to start, well, you pointed out free resources. But I think the driver for your organisation should be, this can make us better.
That's actually a great line to end on. So thank you for that. And I think the words I've picked up all the way through this around confidence, community, poverty, culture change, leadership, people, and discovery. Digital comes after all of that, because that's really what it's about. So I'd just like to say huge thanks again. It's been really interesting. I've really enjoyed talking to and listening to all of you. So thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. And again, do tweet, connect with people, any thoughts you've had after this session, please share them widely. And I look forward to seeing perhaps some of you, and certainly everybody who I can't see in this weird world where I'm sitting in my bedroom, but I know there's loads of other people out there, hoping to see more of you throughout the rest of Digital Leaders Week and our Tech Fest for social good. So thank you all, and have a lovely Monday. Bye.